Welcome to the January 20th, 2017 edition of Colorado Inside Out Postgame, a special web exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on Denver's annual parade commemorating the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Clocking lower attendance numbers and sponsorships were also down, according to the event organizer Vern Howard. The MLK commissioner claims that the sponsors pulled back support and attendees were discouraged after Black Lives Matter interrupted the 2016 festivities. Pat Cancun from Westward, we have a long, proud tradition of parades and frankly some of the bigger celebrations throughout the nation. Were you surprised to see the turnout lower this year?
No, because it was snowing. So, I mean, that's pretty easy for people had the day off, but it was pretty easy to decide I'm going to not go out. I know that the complaint about the numbers maybe being down, sponsorships being down, came out the day before. And it's not a huge surprise because there were some bad headlines last year. But let's remember that Black Lives Matter, it wasn't a violence protest last year, it was a protest. And it was bringing up a lot of issues that we have seen remain important in Denver with the policing, with the Sheriff's Department. So glad Black Lives Matter had its say last year, glad they didn't interrupt this year, and that the parade went smoothly.
David Kopel from the Penn Institute and DU Law School. The parade is a proud tradition in Denver, but probably not a city you would think that would have one of the larger celebrations. Do you think that that proud part of our tradition continues even if after a year of lower turnout?
Well, it's I think the largest parade in the country most years, and one of the basis of it is Denver and neighborhoods like Park Hill, for example, successfully integrated in the 1960s and thereafter. We're I think the largest city of our size in the United States that didn't have a race riot in the 1960s. Representative Wilma Webb, the sponsor of the Martin Luther King bill that passed in 1984, always wanted it to be a very inclusive and broad thing. So, for example, in later years when people who had been elected officials who had been opponents of the King holiday wanted to march in it, there would be some people who'd say, oh, no, they weren't with us then. And she was like, no, if they're with us now, that's right. You know, it took them longer to come around, but if they're coming around, we welcome them. What the Black Lives Matter movement did last year was the opposite of how Dr. King conducted his affairs, which was always at a very high level of dignity. If you want to carry protest signs about things, of course that's fine in the parade, but they came on stage and took over and basically shoved aside the mayor and other officials to talk about their things. That was selfish. And it wasn't violent in the sense that they beat somebody up, but it was a forcible takeover of the speaking. That was wrong. It was contrary to Dr. King, and it's an example, I think, of how too many people in that movement are all about their personal feelings and not thinking about the greater good of the community.
Eric Sonner, political analyst. We talked about it being a proud tradition, but it's also in the middle of Denver, and anything like this is going to have its own politics. Is there more at play here that we're not appreciating to the nitty-gritty of Denver politics?
Well, I think Patty mainly hit it, and I'm a little upset with her. She missed the memo that I'm the weathercaster at the table, particularly given her track record of prediction. She should not be doing weather here. You know, snow. It was a cold and rather yucky day, and I think that is the biggest explanation. I think it's a mistake after all these years to overthink it. One down year doesn't make a trend. 2 or 3 down years might make a trend. We'll see where it goes. I think in terms of loss of sponsorships, it's perhaps also a sign. I mean, what went on last year, David described it accurately, and I think it's a sign that we're living in more fearful times and more polarized times, and so some people dial back on their investment and involvement in that. If you listen to our new president's inaugural speech this morning, I mean, he's also going to cure the problems and like immediately, day after tomorrow, if not today, of the inner city. Now, obviously, inner cities are no longer the province simply of African Americans, and we've had very much of a dispersal of those communities out to the suburbs. But if Trump is true to his word, maybe there won't be quite as much of a need for some of these demonstrations and parades and marades in years to come, and yet I wouldn't bet that.
I didn't think you would. Kristen Wyatt, AP reporter, joins us. We talked about last week about, I believe it's 6 new African-American legislators in the state Senate and the House, more faces than before. And I don't know if that makes a difference on a holiday like this, around just the conversations you hear, whether it's the hallways or it's a holiday, it's a big deal. Where were your impressions with your work at the Capitol?
I didn't see any change at all. But I think what's interesting about holiday remembrances like this is it always says more about the current time, how we remember historical figures and what their importance was than almost that it does. You know, I'm from Atlanta, so as you can imagine, all people do all the time from both races is talk about how Dr. King would have done something and what he thought about that and what that, you know, really meant, what he did and what he said. You know, he wasn't really popular. He wasn't really everybody's, you know, Jesus figure. I keep talking about Jesus to everybody. So, you know, how do you rabble rouse and change things and arguing about, and the thing that struck me about this question was, what would Dr. King make of a parade for him having sponsors? You know, so it's just kind of what to think, but it's a good reminder to think about where we are as a city now. So I think those conversations will go on.
Well said. That's all the time we have for Colorado Insight postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.